about the issues that divide and unite Jews and Muslims. Inshallah, Imam Shamsi will speak for about 40 minutes, and after that, we'll take some questions until 3:30. Now I will turn it over to Imam Shamsi. Tafaddal, Imam.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Shukrillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa mawala. Possibly a kind of a misunderstanding. I thought that history here is now focused on only Nusantara. But I think I'm just going to talk generally about some historical importance of the journey of this ummah and what has impacted us in terms of our rise and failure in the past and the current. But thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you for being here. When we have a great speaker from Indonesia, normally most of Indonesians are going to that session. Luckily, we have those who do not speak Indonesian, so they're here. We have lived in. I am so honored to be a speaker of this session, and this is my seventh, basically, topics in this Mu'tamar about historical context of Islam, blast from the past. Let me first talk about the importance of history in Islam, because we know in America there is no history lessons in the schools. Americans do not study history, and you have only 4 subjects here in the public schools. You have math, science, social studies, and language or English. Other than that, you don't have geography, you don't have history. But in fact, when you come to Al-Islam, history has such an honorable place. First, approximately 2/3 of the Quran, and in this context, all books, religious reference, basically, 2/3 of the Quran contains history. I talk about prophets and their opponents. Adam and his children, his families, started in Surah Al-Baqarah, when he was in paradise down to the earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about his family, talked about his 2 children who fought each other and killed his brother, and so on and so forth. The Quran talks about many nations. It talks about Rome, it talks about Persia, it talks about ancient nations, Egypt. It talks about the opponents of the prophets such as pharaohs and others. But also, for Muslims, we know that Sirah is such an important thing in Islam. And Sirah means the story of the Prophet. And not only the Prophet, but also his Sahaba. And that's why, particularly in Nusantara, Indonesia, Malaysia, and other places, Maulid is such an important thing to do. Maulid is not about celebration, but it's about renewal of our understanding, and more importantly, belief and commitment to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And people are discussing about this. People are, having different opinions on Milad or Maulid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Say that it is a form of innovation, while others say that it's very important because through the Sirah, or the Milad, we can renew our spirit in terms of loving the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I used to take the middle path position, and that is, we have a common ground. Either you agree or disagree on the Milad, it is very important. And our common ground is about the love of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Those who don't do anything during the Maulid, that's fine. That's because they love the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a sense that they want to preserve the originality of the teaching. They want to make sure that everything is right. And that's what the Prophet wanted to. So it means they love also the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But those who are celebrating Milad also love the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so we have a common ground. We don't have to fight over, Maulid, that it is okay or not. Either you do it or not, we are all united as one Ummah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Sahaba, we study them, we study the Tabi'een, and that's why we have the even when you study the Sunnah, basically, it's a form of Sirah too. Because Sunnah, or Hadith, basically, is about Prophet Muhammad's words and actions and agreement. So it means you study about the past, during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But I think also we know from the Quran, and in several places in the Quran, it says, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قِصَصِهِمْ لَعِبْرَةً, that in their stories, there are lessons to learn. Like story of Yusuf alayhi salatu salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ended the story of Yusuf by saying that there's a beautiful lesson that you need to learn from the story of Joseph or Yusuf alayhi salatu salam in the Quran. The importance of story also, history, that even our current, is mostly reflected based on the past as well. We cannot disconnect ourselves from the past. I'm going to talk a little bit later on, but when you talk about America, for example, you cannot disconnect from the history. America is based on Constitution. The Constitution is created by the founding fathers, and we cannot just simply forget the founding fathers when they created America, or Constitution of America, which is we the people. We the people. So it means we the people means every single person within the we the people is Americans, and deserve to be honored and respected. And so it is a reflection of the past. The current is a reflection of the past, but also we may predict the future based on the past. So we look back and then look to the future. We will see the connection. So we cannot disconnect the zonings or the timings where we live in. The past, current, and the future. The problem of the Ummah, the Muslims generally, that they are romanticizing the history. Most of the time we are romanticizing the history. In other words, that we are so proud of the glory of Islam in the past, for example, but we're just proud of it. And we feel that we achieved that glory because we are proud of that. That is something, romanticization of the history. The glory of the past. We talk about Islam in Spain, we talk about Islam in India, we talk about Islam in many parts of the world. And then we feel that everything is solved simply because we have that sense of pride. That is romanticization of history. What I would like to remind myself is it's not only romanticization of the history, but it's about repeating it. In other words, that we need to bring Islam, we present Islam as rahmatan lil alameen, as mercy to all humanity. I just wanted to focus first on some lessons learned from the history of this world and this ummah, and how you see our lives today and how we can predict our life in the future. So I'd like to begin by reminding us that we learn in the history that the glory of this ummah rests in the commitment of this ummah to the deen. Not otherwise. Not otherwise. So we do not misunderstand that, unfortunately, there are some Muslims misunderstand that the more we are committed to the deen, the more we are, seemingly away from the advancement of the world. The reason why Muslims are not advanced simply because they are too much into religion. In fact, we have to upside down that view that the reality is that when the Muslims are committed to the deen, that is the beginning of the glory, basically. And when we talk about glory for this ummah, it's not only exclusively for this ummah, because once again, all of you know that Islam is rahmatan lil alameen, Islam is mercy to all humanity. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example, let's begin with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born in Makkah, as all of you know, then migrated to Medina later on in his life after 13 years of struggle in Makkah. And the reason why he moved to Medina is not only because of the challenges that he faced in Makkah. Many people say Prophet Muhammad migrated to Medina because he could not handle the challenges in Makkah. That's not the real reason. The Prophet cannot run and will never run away from any challenge. So Prophet Muhammad did not run away from the challenges of Meccans. He moved to Medina because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him to move to Medina for a reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to make the city, which was called at that time, prior to Medina, as Yathrib. Now Rasulullah sallallahu moved to Medina because this is the place where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed to be the beginning of the Muslim community to develop. And that city later on is changed the name of Rasulullah to Medina. Now, many of us, for those who are speaking Arabic, when we hear the word Medina, the first one comes to mind is city. And of course, that's the literal translation of Medina. But city is not only about buildings such as in New York or Manhattan, or Sorbonne or Paris. It's not about physical and material advancements only. In fact, when Rasulullah ﷺ moved to Medina, as you may remember, the first one that Rasulullah did in Medina was establishing a masjid, a mosque, and that is called Quba. Now, why then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ established, the first thing that he did, establishing a masjid? Because the word Medina comes, or derives from the word Dana Yadinu. And the word Din means religion, which is essentially means obedience, ita'atullah, the obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Rasulullah ﷺ begins the journey by establishing the mosque, he wanted to remind the Muslims that as we are preparing to establish this community, this city, Allah's obedience, ita'atullah, must not be kept aside. It must be the foundation of the city. That is obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now when we take this to America, America is very clear. This nation is built on one God. It's God, under God. So it means that America cannot be separated from that, from the divinity, from the divine. And I think the biggest challenge that we are facing in America at the moment is that we are marginalizing the divinity, the divines. We are marginalizing that moral grounds of collective life in America. While the Constitution says it's under God. And so that is similar to Medina al-Munawwara when Rasulullah built the masjid first. That is similar to under God. That God must be taken seriously in the process of establishing the city or the nation. In less than 20 years, Umar Allahu anhu, took over or victoriously some places such as Sham. Sham includes Syria, Jordan, and also Palestine, which is now included Israel as well. But these are all called Sham. And that is just less in 20 years after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then later on, some of those who took over the power became corrupt, and then the Muslim Ummah declined. But there is one leader, which is known at that time as Khalifa, and he is known as the fifth Khalifa al-Rashidin, that is Umar bin Abdul Aziz. Only in 2.5 years of power, he was able to establish a solid ummah, such an extent that there is no single person feels that he has the right to receive zakat. It means everybody is prosperous under his leadership in just 2.5 years. Then you have Tariq bin Ziyad with Spain, this story. Then Ta'if. Remember Ta'if? When Rasulullah ﷺ went to Ta'if and he was thrown by the crazy people, by the kids. Just 90 years later, there is a person called Muhammad bin Al-Qasim, 90 years old, 90 years later. He was the one who went to India. He went to India, and now India has become one of the center of Islam when he went there. But Muhammad Al-Qasim did not force the Hindus to become a Muslim. The Muslims in India did not force the Hindus to become a Muslim. That's the reason why India remains the largest Hindu country in the world. Even though sometimes in the past, Muslims were in power in India. Sadly, that our ummah today is being marginalized in almost every corner of life. Economically speaking, just recently I attended one of the Zoom meeting where our former Vice President, Pak Yusuf Kala, was one of the speakers. And he mentioned that out of 10 richest person in Indonesia is only one Muslim, only Pak Khairul Tanjung. And out of 50
or 150, I think 50, richest Indonesians, there are only 5 Indonesians rich. Yeah, right, 5 Muslims who are richest in Indonesia. So you can imagine, 87% of the populations have only 5% of the wealth in the country. So that's when we talk about economy. We talk about politics. I don't want to talk this much because it's very sensitive. We are in a political season. I don't want to be so much political. Militarily speaking, the only nation.
And that's why in the beginning of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
she wanted to ask about minaret and dome, the dome of the masjid. And so we talk about the dome, we talk about the minaret, and she said, I'm tired. I thought she was tired of my presentation. So I asked her, why you're tired? She said, I don't know why I'm living. I said, how old are you? She said, I'm 23. I said, what do you do? I am modeling. She's a model. Model means, physically must be beautiful, must be shaped, So she was jogging and looked at the masjid, and she was amazed by the minaret and the dome. So I asked her why. She said, the life is, I don't know. I'm going, in the morning I wake up, preparing myself to go to morning. At night I am modeling, and I don't know. She was tired of this life. And that is because everyone is looking for something else. To make story short, she became Muslim, alhamdulillah. Just a few months ago, she became a Muslim. And that is because she was disoriented. Why she was disoriented? Because looks like nothing else but money. People are walking and walking and walking, just like walking in the middle of the desert, and she doesn't know where to go. So you can imagine if you walk in the middle of the desert, and you don't know what the destination will be. You're tired. Similarly with this lady. And so dunya had been a factor that many people have basically failed. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ reminded this ummah a long time ago. Reminded us. And he said one day this ummah will be just like a foam in the middle of the ocean, moving around. Muslims are still 57, the largest organization, second largest organization after non-aligned movement at the United Nations. But they cannot do anything. And that is simply because we are like foam in the middle of the ocean. So the Sahaba say, why, Ya Rasulullah? Why we cannot? Why we are so humiliated at the time? Rasulullah ﷺ said, because you have a disease, you have a sickness. And what is that? Rasulullah say, wahan. Wahan. So the Sahaba asked, what is wahan ya Rasulullah? Mal wahan ya Rasulullah?
So it's not everything. It's not money is everything. So that is what dunya is all about. So again, it's the second historical lesson that we learned, that nations fail because they've been misunderstanding of dunya. Alhamdulillah, this teaching al-Islam gives a very clear on how to deal with dunya. Everything in the Quran is very clear. حسنة في الدنيا وحسنة في الآخرة. فمن الناس من يقول ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وما له في الآخرة من خلاق. And among the people who say, oh Allah, give me this dunya, they want only dunya. ما له في الآخرة من خلاق. They don't have any share in the day of judgment. ومنهم, and among them, among the people who say, oh Allah, give us goodness here in this dunya and goodness in the hereafter and protect us from the hellfire. That is the way Islam is seeing this dunya. That this dunya is important, but it's not everything. This is number second. The third one that I'd like to underline today is about the history tells us that we can only win the battle when we can win the battle of image and perception. The hardest war that we are facing as an ummah, as a Muslim today, is about war of perception. It's about images. Look at what happened to Qatar. With all controversial things that people say controversial. But you know, Qatar have proven that Islam is not a threat to anybody. You can come to Qatar and embrace you, and you are being entertained at the same time. You enjoy the football, you enjoy the soccer. Qatar is so open and inclusive. But my point, how people are trying to portray Qatar as a less human country, less tolerant country, a nation that doesn't give freedom to the people. And again, it's a part of that image wars and perception. And many of Islamophobes, those who scare of Islam, because they have those images about al-Islam. A long time before I came to your event at North Florida University, I was speaking at the same university, organized by the Indonesian Embassy and Nusantara Foundation at the time, basically. At that time, there is a pastor called Pastor Jones who wanted to burn the Quran, and his church basically is not that far from North Florida University. So while I was speaking about Islam in that university, North Florida University, there's like 5 people in the back had these banners, the word Sharia with blood, picture of blood on the word Sharia. So some of the security wanted to bring them out, let them sit. So they sat with their banners. They enjoy it. So they did a lecture, by the way. So after finishing the Q&A, because they didn't ask questions, by the way, we went to them, shook hands, said, okay, I'm here, any questions you want to ask? But I asked them, do you know what Sharia that you're bringing, the word Sharia? None of the 5 people can ever give an answer. What Sharia is all about. What they say is just simply barbaric law. That's it. So, have you ever read the Quran? No. Have you ever met any Muslims? No. No. So my point here, many of those who are scared of Islam is simply because they have these imaginations. Of course, imaginations by media, by politicians, but also by some Muslims' misrepresentation of Islam. So they have that imagination in the back of their head. So again, we are fighting perceptions. And the Holy Quran reminds us, يُرِيدُونَ لِيُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ وَاللَّهُ مُتِمُّ نُورِهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ. They wanted to extinguish the light of Allah with their mouths. In the time of Rasulullah, they did their mouth. They went all around to say, Prophet Muhammad is a magician, he is sahir, majnoon, he is crazy, with real mouth, physical mouth. But today, media is the biggest mouth. Social media is even bigger mouth. They utilize all these to present images about al-Islam, which is not true in many cases. So again, we are fighting this, and history tells us that if you want to win the battle, win the war against misperception. This is number 3. Number 4, I would like to address now myself and all of us, those who are living in America, as Americans. I'm Indonesian Americans, we are European Americans, we have some Turkish Americans, but we are all Americans. Because America is a land of immigrants. And hopefully still a land of opportunity. That's why immigrants come here. I still remember when our friend Donald Trump sent out a Twitter saying that Republicans must be careful of the immigrants. They are coming to take over our country. I am a follower of his Twitter before he was banned by Twitter. So I responded, I don't know if you read it or not. If you read it, I don't know. I said, so that you have to go back to your country too, because you're coming from Europe. But my point here, that we are addressing now Americans. We are learning from the history that all immigrants who came to this country faced, of course, with an exception of Columbus, who came to this country, but every other immigrant community who came to this country faced tremendous challenge. You're talking about Italian. No one wanted to eat Italian food in New York. Now Italian food is the most prestigious food in New York. Not Turkish food so far. Or not yet Turkish food. Still Italian food. And it's only pasta, pasta and pizza. But they used to be rejected. Irish, they're still facing tremendous challenge. You're talking about Hispanic, Japanese, Chinese, Asian in general. Our African American brothers, who came to this country, they came unwillingly. They were forced to come to this country, but they faced tremendous challenge. But what we need to learn from history here that they almost all of them, successfully empowered themselves, and particularly also the Jewish people. When the Jewish people landed here in this country, in the not Staten Island, what is the name of the island in Russia? Ellis Island. When the Jewish people entered to Ellis Island, they were returned to Europe to be massacred. They faced tremendous challenge. But almost all these religious communities or ethnic communities successfully faced the challenges or passed the challenges, relatively of course. Particularly the Jewish people, we need to learn from them. And the question is how they got to empower themselves. Why the Jewish people are becoming so powerful in America? Despite the fact that only 5 million are Jewish people in America. And I think Muslims are even more than 7, maybe 10 millions, maybe more than that. Maybe double than the Jewish community. But why the Jewish people are so powerful? And I don't mean here negative, it's positive. Because they are powerful. They can direct politics, they can direct policy. Why? And one of the things we learned from them, and one of the reasons why I engaged the Jewish community, because I wanted to learn from them. I wanted to learn from them. The most important thing to learn from them is that they are willing to engage the American life, and particularly American politics. This is a very important lesson for the Muslims, that there is the only way to survive here in this country and to be able to empower ourselves when we live our life as other Americans live their life. In other words, sometimes we call that integration. We cannot afford without integration to be Muslims in America. Don't say again, oh, I'm American, I'm Muslim Egyptian, I'm Muslim Pakistani, I'm Muslim Turkish, I'm Muslim Indonesian. And this is why I just mentioned this morning in my other session that we Indonesians sometimes jago kandang, jago kandang. We are best in our own, within our own comfort zone, But we don't want to get out. We cannot empower ourselves without integrating into larger society. And I mean this not only socially speaking, this is also religiously speaking, because the Quran is very clear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا. No. وَالَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمَّةِ رَسُولًا مِنْهُمْ. Allah is the one who sent a messenger from among themselves. In other words, when you live in America, you have to live Americans. And I mean positive understanding here. So negative. So you have to take part in the larger American life. Alhamdulillah, our young generation began to understand that. Recently, there is a midterm election in America, as you may know. 83 Muslims, alhamdulillah, were elected into different levels of public position. City council persons, state assembly persons, judge, and others. 83 Muslims were elected. So it means our young generation began to understand that we cannot simply empower ourselves without being integrated into the larger mainstream society. That is a lesson that we learn. We are learning from the history of Italian, Irish, Jewish, Japanese, and others here in this country. And the Muslim must learn the history. The last one, before we take Q&A, is about learning from the history, we learn from the history that at the end of the day, no matter how cloudy the sky is, there's a sun behind it. Sun behind it. In other words, that we must keep our heads up. We must keep our optimism. Because I used to say, no matter what, the truth will prevail. And different ayat in the Holy Quran, Allah promises us, Allah inna nasrallahi qareeb. Verily, the help of Allah is so close. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu ansar Allah, kama qala Isa ibn Maryam lil-hawariyina man ansar ila Allah, qala al-hawariyuna nahnu ansar Allah. At the end of the day, when we convey the deen of Allah, people are divided. فآمن الطائفة, some will accept and become believers. وكفر الطائفة, and some others still reject it. That's fine. That's with the law. This is a divine law. That we cannot convince everybody to follow what we believe in. But one thing we have to know, at the end of the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stresses or underlines, فَأَيَّدْنَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا عَلَىٰ عَدُوِّهِمْ, and we give assistance to the believers over their enemies. فَأَصْبَحُوا ظَاهِرِينَ, and so they are victorious. So victory will be the side of the truth. So continue your heads, keep your heads up, continue being optimistic, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be with us. But let me end with this, brothers and sisters. You know, sometimes history is being handled dishonestly. And there are things I have to mention. I mentioned in my session this morning that I went to 9 countries before the pandemic. I was in Germany, I was in Netherlands, I was in Austria, Slovakia, then I went to Serbia. And particularly in Slovakia and Serbia, I like coffee, and I like Turkish coffee, by the way. So I went to the shop and I wanted to buy coffee, and I said, I want Turkish coffee because I saw the people drinking Turkish coffee. And the person who guided me said, Imam, there's a Turkish coffee here. I said, why? They said, the word Turkish is scary, and because of history, Ottoman Empire. So what says a special coffee? Why I'm mentioning this? Because there is a dishonesty in understanding the history. You know, Indonesians may be so proud when they say there's American coffee in Indonesia. Or there's a Dutch coffee in Indonesia. There's this European coffee. You know, that's why I have a restaurant in Cianjur, and I have also a coffee shop. I named my coffee shop New York City Coffee, NYC Coffee. And people love it. People come simply because they New York City, man, in Cianjur. So they are proud of the West, while those in the West are so scared of Islam. And that's because there is a dishonesty sometimes in understanding the history. That no single nation has free blood on their hands. So I think we have to be honest, including the history of the Jewish people in Medina. How many Jewish people are so scared of Muslims because they say Prophet Muhammad massacred the Muslims in Medina? You know, brothers, some of the Jewish people were punished not because of religions, because of betrayal that they do to the nation. You still remember when America bombed, what is that, the follower of Al-Qaeda in Yemen? Anwar al-Awlaki. Why America killed Anwar al-Awlaki? Because he's an American and he betrayed America. Similarly, when the Jewish people betrayed the Prophet as the president in Medina, it's nothing to do with religion. It's something to do with citizenship. Citizen in Medina. Prophet Muhammad gave them 3 choices. Migrate somewhere else, or change, do not be rebellious, or you're going to face the consequences. But the people still say Prophet Muhammad massacred the Jewish people in Medina. And that's why the Jewish people are so, I'm sorry to use this, so scared of Muslims. They say Muslims are coming to kill us. They are going to eliminate us. And we Muslims also sometimes, mistakenly, use some verses or hadith to say, no, we have to fight against the Jewish people. Because this is hadith. Out of context. Out of context. So this is the first point I'd like to end with, and secondly, particularly those who are from Nusantara, from Indonesia, remember that Indonesia become Indonesia must be remembered very clearly because of the struggles of our scholars. Kiai-kiai di pondok pesantren, para santri, we cannot disconnect between Islam and Indonesia. And ulama, Jenderal Sudirman, Bung Tomo, and all these are all various committed Muslims. And even Pramuka Pancasila, you know Pancasila? This is the biggest gift of Muslims, Indonesian Muslim scholars to the nation. That is Pancasila. And so I would like to say, jangan lupa kulit durian, jangan hanya makan duriannya, lupa kulitnya. Walaupun kulitnya kadang berduri, tapi tanpa kulit durian akan rusak. Maka Indonesia jangan lupa sejarah lah. Ya, dalam upaya membangun Indonesia ini, jangan membangun Indonesia kemudian melupakan sejarah bahwa Islam memainkan peranan terdepan di dalam membangun bangsa kita. I think it's enough, because the time is up. We may have some discussion. Not necessarily Q&A, but discussion if anyone wants to say something.
Yeah, Jazakallah, Imam Shamsi. I open the floor for questions. I'll take, I guess, 3 questions first on the first round. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Mohon izin saya bertanya dengan bahasa Indonesia. Nama saya Mela dari Michigan. Saya izin bertanya tadi Imam Shamsi mention tentang Uighur, Palestina, kemudian negara-negara yang penduduk Muslim tapi mereka dalam kesulitan, dan kita agak berdaya. Kita seperti buih di lautan tadi karena penyakit wahan seperti itu. Ketika kita dalam keadaan tidak berdaya menolong mereka, bagaimana gitu ya sekecil-kecil usaha kita untuk memang menolong mereka seperti itu dalam pandangan Imam Shamsi. Ya, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh. Second question.
It's more of a comment and a question as well. When you said about the disorientation that is happening within the young generation, certainly there's a lot of that. I live in LA, and generally a lot has been happening within the people in LA that they're yearning for something. So you see a lot of young generations trying to search for that answer, and the answer they might. So you see in the downtown a lot of spiritual shops are opening, like tarot cards, spiritual energy, like yoga, and they're trying to yearn for that connection. So certainly there is some sort of like yearning for that spiritual connection, especially in California. And my second question is regard to getting into the sphere of being empowered through whatever the non-Muslims are doing and whatnot. You said something along the line of social media and the power of social media. I guess I don't know if you heard of this person like Andrew Tate. I don't know if you heard Andrew Tate or like this big figure. But recently in the online sphere, there's this like a prominent figures and a lot of people who, well, first of all, if you haven't heard of Andrew Tate, it's like he's very sometimes seen as controversial, and he's a controversial figure in terms of the idea of role of man, role of woman. But recently he made comment about Islam and how Islam followed his way of life and his perception of life. But recently he converted to Islam, And a lot of people who heard about Islam is coming through him, essentially. And not a lot of it follows the idea and the teaching of Islam, but unfortunately a lot of youth are connecting the values of Islam to his kind of controversial ideas about females and males and whatnot. So, in what ways, like how do you kind of integrate ourselves within that, YouTube sphere and social media sphere and whatnot?
Thank you.
I'm still processing my thoughts here because I was intrigued by your point about Muslim involvement in politics. I see that in America, Muslim involvement is more positive because we can gain more power and influence in American society. But in Indonesia, when it comes to political affiliation, we are still the major players in Indonesia, but most of the times that political affiliation what makes us divided as Indonesians. So what can we do about that? I think that's all I have in mind.
Okay, thank you. Important questions. The first was about what we can do for our Muslim brothers and sisters in other parts of the world. Second is, I guess, about navigating the online sphere as Muslims, especially the youth. And the third is about the relation between Islam and politics, especially in Indonesia.
One of the things that you have to know about Islam is result-oriented. So Islam is result-oriented. The process is very important, but it doesn't mean that we don't care about the result. So when you talk about helping those marginalized brothers and sisters in different parts of the world, including in Palestine or Kashmir and some other places, our efforts must be clear in terms of orientation, what we're going to achieve. Yes, of course, we can go to the street raising our voices with all these, sometime in Jakarta we see this is baju jubah and swords, on their hands, and say, we are going to take over, Palestine, we're going to give freedom to Palestine. Yeah, that might be okay as a way, because it's part of democracy, demonstration. But I think for us in America, I think you're in America from Michigan, there are many things to do here. I think one of the great things to do is about having political engagement, because it's about policy. When I go to Indonesia, normally people ask me, what do you do in America in terms of trying to convince the governments that America and Israel, Palestine and Israel are equal and need to be dealt equally, because it always looks like America is always to the side of Israel. That's what we see, and so I told them that I'm doing my way as much as I can according to my circumstance in America. And one of the things that I do in America is I involve as much as I can in the political process of this country. And if you see, the changes happen, by the way. We have right now 4 Congress members, Muslims. But not only Muslims, because the issue of Palestine is not about religions only. Of course, religious sentiments involved, but you have to understand it's a political issue, geographical political issue. And so it's not the issue of Muslims only here, but we have 4 Muslim Congress members in DC. And I think the tone is different. It is so difficult in the past to criticize by simply criticizing Israel. But now you can see people criticizing Israel in Capitol Hill. It means there's a change here happening. Locally speaking, our young Muslims are becoming even more brave in terms of voicing out in defending the rights of Palestinians as human beings, not necessarily as Muslims, because a lot of Christians in Palestine, by the way, even some Jews also, Palestinian Jews, we have some. So it's not about religion. Yes, religious sentiment involved, but it's not pure religious issue. And so what we can do here, because you're from Michigan, I'm from New York, is number one, engage our politicians, take part in the process, so that we can empower our voice more.
But more importantly also, educate our neighbors. And in my own case, it's about engaging other communities. For example, the Jewish community. At the end of the day, I can say that 90%, even more, see Israel as a part of their faith. Israel state for the Jewish people is a part of their faith. Similarly, when you see Jerusalem or Beit al-Maqdis or as a part of our faith too, we are connected to the faith. It's difficult here to reconcile between two faiths. But my point here that we need to continue engagement with them, to have dialogue with them, and at the end of the day we have to let them know that we have our concern about our brothers and sisters in Palestine. All the time at the end of the day, we have to say we agree to disagree without being disagreeable. At the end of the day we are going to disagree, but we don't have to fight each other because we have some other issues that we can work with. Islamophobia and anti-Semitism is equally high in America. There are many people who don't like Jews too, here in this country, similar to Muslims as well. So we work with the Jewish community in facing Islamophobia and anti-Semitism together. And my motto in New York with my partner in dialogue, his name is Rabbi Schreier, is about fighting for one another. So your fight is mine, and my fight is yours. Jewish people fight against Islamophobia, and Muslims fight against anti-Semitism. But when you come to Israel and Palestine, we say, yeah, you have your own opinions, I have my own opinions. And sometimes we cannot reconcile. And we agree to disagree on this particular point. And I'm sticking into supporting my Palestinian brothers and sisters to have their land free. It's not only because Muslims, because there's human rights. It's a basic right of every human to be free. And I think we have to understand that position. So do according to the situation where you live in. Political engagement, educating your neighbors. If you are religious leaders, engage in interfaith leaders, dialogue. That's one of the best ways to have our brothers and sisters in different parts of the world. In fact, when the issue of Rohingya was so high at that time, the Buddhist Association in New York invited me to visit Myanmar or Burma at the time because we have a very close relation with the Buddhist Muslim dialogue in New York. But unfortunately, it didn't happen because we didn't get permit from the Myanmar's government at the time. And so we must continue this engagement. Now coming to the Tete, what is his name, Tete? What's the name of that guy? Andrew Tete. It's very famous, right? I didn't know him before by the way, we thank Allah for the guidance that at the end of the day he converted to Islam. We appreciate his opinion about Islam, that how Islam is the religion. Even he considers that only Islam can preserve, values that, in line with our fitra, in our language. So we appreciate that. But on the other hand, I think we have to understand that, we cannot rely on a person, on one person. Islam is ummah. And I always say there is no difference between a minister or king, let's say, or a president became a Muslim, and those who are walking on the street became a Muslim. For me, it's the same. As he died, it's honorable in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I don't differentiate people on the basis of classes. But we appreciate that he's very prominent, he's well known. I think he's in Qatar when there's a World Cup as well. And with his prominence, I think he can influence many. At least that he can influence other people to see that Islam is not a religion that has been perceived for a long time. Islam is the religion of everyone. But sometimes the person has his own background. We have to understand his context, the context of his background. That he was a kind of rebellious within his own community at that time. And if he can use that rebellious attitude positively, it's good. But we don't want to have that rebellious attitude and use it in the wrong way, because we want to balance between what is the value that Islam upholds highly and the person who claims to be representing Islam. We don't want that harsh words, bad words, kata kotor in English? Katakan, profanity, you know, in the name, using profanity in the name of Islam, because at the same time, it looks like destroying the face of Islam itself. But again, we thank Allah for him that Allah guided him to Islam. And once again, every Muslim is learning, and learning is a life process, so he's learning, I'm sure. Now, coming to politics, and particularly Indonesia, we have Cebong, we have this one, right? Cebong, and I would say that one. Kampret. That's Indonesian term. You know, this is an issue of maturity. You know, when you come to politics, difference will be there. Even in America, you know, how polarized the people are in terms of politics. Some people are supporting this, some people are supporting that. Within a party, there are some so liberal, some, you know, moderate Democrat, liberal Democrat, conservative Republican, moderate Republicans, you know, different views. But at the end of the day, I think we have to realize that we are all doing things for the same purpose, and that is for the nation, for the country. So in Indonesia, for example, in the last election, we have Pak Jokowi and Prabowo as the two candidates, and people are so deeply divided. And being divided is okay, it's normal, it's natural. But being stuck with that situation is very sad. Because even Prabowo had joined the government, became a minister. And while the followers of Prabowo still hating Jokowi. And this is just the reality. So I think what we need to learn here is we need to learn to be more mature. To be more mature. Maturity is very important in managing our diversity. If we are not mature, it's so difficult. Within the Muslim community, you know, we have ethnic differences, we have madhab differences, and if we are not mature enough in facing all those differences that we have, we're going to fight in the community. You know, Jamaica Muslim Center is a prominent Islamic center in New York, mostly Bengalis. It means Hanafi. And I'm from Indonesia. My background is Muhammadiyah. We do not belong to any particular madhab, basically, Muhammadiyah. But people know that Indonesians are mostly Shafi'i. And now I'm leading Hanafi. How should I present myself? So I have to educate myself to be someone who is different from them. As a leader of this community, whose majority are Hanafi. But as the time passes, these people are learning. So if you go to Jamaica Muslim Center, they used to pray 20 rak'ah. Now, only half will continue after 8 rak'ah. Only half. After 8 rak'ah, they will leave the masjid. Because they understand that you can pray 8 or 20 rak'ah, both are accepted, inshallah, as long as you are sincerely doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what we need in Indonesia is maturity. The problem of Indonesia is that everything is being politicized. Everything is being politicized. Religion is being politicized. Money is being politicized. The economy is being politicized. And everything is being decided by the bosses of the politics, of particular political party. So if the leaders of political party do not smile to each other, people are not smiling to each other. In America, it's not the bosses of political parties. People can decide themselves. You know, you can imagine between Donald Trump and Biden. Biden even didn't want to attend Biden's inaugurations. He brought some important document to Florida. You can imagine that. But American people down, relatively okay. Yes, discussions are there, sometimes heated, but because of the maturity that we have in America. So what Indonesia must learn is to be more mature in facing this polarization in the community. Always think that Indonesia is the same common ground. We want Indonesia to be better, to be stronger, to be more advanced. That's why we have to be united.
Jazakallah, Imam Shamsi. We still have some time, so if there are still some questions, I'll take 2 and keep it short. All right, not yet. Yeah, I have a question of my own actually, Imam Shamsi.
Can I ask a question?
Just as a filler, waiting for you guys to raise your hand. Early in your talk, you talk about the fact that we romanticize history our history as Islamic community. I think the answer of my question was like somewhere in your whole lecture, but if you can elaborate a little more of why do you think we romanticize our history, and now that we know that is it not mature, as you say, yeah, so it doesn't happen. Thank you.
Romanticization of history. It means we are so proud of the history, but we fail to grasp back that glory of the history, of glorious history. I think there are several reasons, but the first one is that is the representation that we have a self-confidence in ourselves. And we feel that we cannot do at the moment, at the current. So we make that history as a cover-up to cover our own weaknesses and self-confidence. And so I think we need to build self-confidence that as others can grow and advance, can strong, can whatever, we can do. Or as Barack Obama said, yes, we can. And that's what the Muslims in America must do. You know, when the Jewish people have become powerful, Italian people have become powerful, they are, you know, why we cannot? And one of the reasons for Muslims in America is because we are united inside of the masjid. But we are deeply disunited outside of the masjid. We can unite ourselves in the masjid, in the mosques, with good lines. But in the market, we don't have that unity. There is no networking. You know, you go to Indonesia, you go to every mosque, it's full. Not only Jummah, even in Madrid, full masjid. But you go to the markets, nothing happens. And so we need to change that direction. This is the first one, self-confidence. That's why they are romanticizing history. The second one is the lacking of capability. I think that is a challenge. Education-wise, economic-wise, politic-wise, almost in every corner of life we are lacking. And I think we need to empower ourselves in every corner of those. And particularly I say education. Education, because education is the key to success. Without education, we cannot succeed in anything. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, I think, told us from the very beginning that if Allah wants to increase your degree, darajat, then you have to seek knowledge. Allah will raise the degree of you if you are believing and seek knowledge. So knowledge is essential. So education is very important. And once again, when you talk about library, even just research, how many research institutions that we have in Indonesia, for example, or in the Muslim countries in Europe, in America, research is also very important. You know, in Indonesia, people becomes like PhDs or even professor. They didn't do really research. But here in America, research is such very important. And that's what Iqra is all about. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name of your Lord. And so education is very important. So Muslims must come back again and educate themselves, empower themselves with knowledge. And through that knowledge, we can hopefully empower ourselves in other corners of life, economically, politically, and others. And so there are two reasons only that I mentioned why Muslims tend to romanticize the history rather than grasping back the glory of the history.
Yeah, Jazakallah, Imam Fahmi, Imam Shamsi. Okay, we got two questions.
Assalamualaikum, Imam. It's Honest from Los Angeles. I had a question about, coming from the idea of history and where we're coming from towards today. I hear that the idea of being a Western Muslim is sometimes stigmatized. The idea of being very Western. I would hear, for example, being Indonesian Muslim is, there's no issue, or being some other place. But then in terms of being a Western Muslim, and I feel with some of our elders when they say, you're too Western, right? Is there compatibility, or is it an oxymoron between being Western and being Muslim at the same time, or is that something we're navigating? Because, the idea of the New York City
question pertains to having a friend. So in uni, I have a friend who's from Russia, and we're in the same engineering program, and we're very close. The thing is we would have all these conversations, very intellectual conversations, and then sometimes the topic of religion would come. And I'm sure it's because of history as well as how she was raised, her parents' beliefs, that she doesn't really have a good view of Islam. And I would sometimes talk to her about how I was taught and like our culture. But I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts on how to sort of have those types of conversations with people who aren't very keen on religion or Islam in general, for them to have a good view of it, and for them to sort of like not convert, but more so just like change their views to have it to be a better one. Thank you. Just like all.
Okay, thank you. Imam Shamsi.
Yeah, so the first one is about stigmatization of people in relation to the religion. And it's not only West and non-West here, or Western and non-Western, but also even within the Muslim community. How often I myself being stigmatized as less than others simply because I have long beard, or I don't dress like Middle Eastern dresses or all this stuff. You know, I still remember when Jamaica Muslim Center, which is one of the prominent in New York, invited me. I didn't reply for it. Invited me to be the director and imam at the same time. And people began to resist because I don't have long beard. I don't have beard, by the way. And so the president of the masjid, in one of the Friday, he stood up and he said, "Do you want him to have beer? I'm going to buy a beer on the street, on the market." And I put on him. I said, so unfortunately, this is happening. It's happening. And I think we need to change that first within ourselves, within our community, that stigmatization of Muslims based on different grounds, including ethnic or racial backgrounds. Now, coming to the Western, so-called Western and Eastern, I mentioned this morning in my session that the terminology itself is problematic because the dichotomy of peoples on the basis of this West and East itself is based on something that, without realizing it, is a part of that colonial mentality. Some people consider themselves Western and others are non-Western. And Western here is not geography, nothing to do with geography, not geographical terminology. It's mostly demographic terminology. In other words, some people, even though they live in the eastern part of the world, they consider themselves Western simply because they feel I am better, I'm more educated, more advanced, more civilized, and so on and so forth. And so I challenged one of the professors in one of the recent conferences in Indonesia. There is World Peace Forum in Solo recently. And I was a speaker, and then my co-speakers is former vice president of World Bank. She is the director of Interfaith Association of G20. So she was a speaker. So I challenged her. I said, "What do you mean with Western?" And she said, "Western means those nations who are living in the west part of the world." And particularly she said Europe and America. So I said to her, "How about," because we have some Australians also. So I said, "How about our friends from Australia?" And they are white Australians. Are you considering yourself Eastern or Western? And everybody said, I consider myself Western, by the way. So in other words, that even that terminology is problematic itself. So it's not geographic, it is mostly demographic. And so when the people, unfortunately, when the Muslims say that Western Muslims are less, that is a very opposite of the real word of Western. Let me go back to the basic here. Islam is not West or East. La Sharqiyya la Gharbiyya. Islam is not based on racial, ethnic ground. Islam is the religion of Allah, kafatan linnas, for all humanity, fully equal. Rahmatan lil alamin, for all mankind, fully equal. And when I was an imam at the Islamic Center in New York, the 96th Street Masjid, the largest masjid in New York, I used to give khutbah about racial equality, and mostly Arab people there, And I say, you Arab, don't think that you are better Muslim than the Chinese. If the Chinese are committed to following Islam, they are going to be better than you, and they are deeply offended. And simply because some people think that they are better Muslim because they associate with certain ethnicity. Islam has nothing to do with ethnicity, nothing to do with race, nothing to do with skin color, nothing to do with anything but Quran and Sunnah. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wants us to follow. And so again, that stigmatization is deeply wrong, and I think we need to change it. Within the Muslim, even, sorry for anybody's from Malaysia, there is a time in Malaysia where people, you're from Malaysia? No? Okay. There was time in Malaysia that when the Muslims consider themselves Malay. So it means Muslims only Malay. There are great Muslim Chinese and Indians in Malaysia. But they will say Muslims is equal to Malay. It's not only Malay. Everyone who embraces Islam, they're Muslims. Period. And they can be best, most better than any Arab who do not follow Al-Islam. So again, we need to educate ourselves and our community about this to be, minimize this tendency of stigmatizing the people on the basis of where they associated with. My brothers who accepted Islam later on in their life, when they come to the masjid, that's what the problem is, because most of the masajid in America is being organized by uncles who are immigrants. So it's called uncles management. And our brothers, I have to say, particularly our white brothers, when Muslim brothers, when they go to the masjid, they will, even though you have become Muslim many, many years, 20 years, 30 years, they will see you new Muslims. And in fact, there is no such a new Muslim basically, because most of those brothers who turned to Islam, they studied even better than us. We have taken Islam for granted. We are born Muslims. We're born from Muslim parents. Everybody's born Muslim, by the way, that's our understanding. But we're born from Muslim parents. And we took it for granted. We didn't study it. Sometimes we don't understand it, but we feel we are the best Muslims. But those brothers who accepted Islam, I'm sure they studied it. Less or more. So they are better sometimes. But when you go to the masjid, to the masajid, to the mosque, they will see you as, they are less. They do not know. They are new Muslims. Always mu'allaf. They always call you mu'allaf. Even if you become Muslim like 30 years, 40 years, you're still mu'allaf. You see, that is stigmatization. And we need to change that in our community. We need to change it. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us. This is the first one. There's another one.
Yes.
The back one. Yeah. I think this is similar to my experience in New York when I started my interfaith dialogue with Mark Schneier, who co-authored a book with me called Sons of Abraham. And as I mentioned in the morning, that my book is being translated into 6 languages now. And in fact, it's already published in Dubai in Arabic. Sons of Abraham, Issues that Unite and Divide Jews and Muslims, by me and Mark Schneier, forward by President Bill Clinton, by the way. So this man, named Mark Schneier, I met him the first time when Pope John died in end of 2004. I was invited by the CBS television to an interview about Pope John's interfaith outreach for non-Muslims perspective, for non-Christian perspective. So I represented the Muslim and he represented the Jewish community in the studio. I extended my hand. He didn't want to accept my hand. He didn't want to accept. He didn't even very rarely see my face. We did the interview, by the way. We finished it and we dispersed. 6 months later, he called me and he said, Imam, can we meet? So I asked him, who is this? He introduced himself. I'm Rabbi Mark Schneier. So we met. We met in one of the seafood restaurants because he said, I'm eating only kosher. I said, I'm eating only halal. So I said, oh, let's meet in the seafood. But I know that the Jewish people don't eat lobster, so I ordered big lobsters. And then I asked him, Rabbi Mark Schneier, Rabbi, why you didn't want to shake my hand in the studio? I'm honest and I'm open because I'm from Makassar, so I'm very open. So why you didn't want to shake my hand? He said there are 2 reasons, Imam. He laughed. 2 reasons. Number 1, I was not sure that you're Muslims. With that stigmatization that Muslims must be Arabs. Jadi kalau kurang mancung, not Muslim. you know mancung. If you have different nose, and then you're less Islamic. So look like you're not Muslim. Secondly,
I did not, past tense, I did not like Muslims. So I said, why didn't you invite me? He said, because I've seen you several times on TV, so it looks like you're a good ambassador for your faith. It's okay. And then he began to ask me several questions: jihad, Sharia, women, Islam, how do you perceive the Jewish community and the non-Muslims, and so on and so forth. And I asked him one question. I said, Rabbi, what does it mean to be chosen? Because people, Jewish people claim to be chosen people. And he gave me a very beautiful interpretation. Similar to what the Quran says, Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas ta'murun. And the word chosen comes from khara, yakhiru, ikhtara, ikhtiyar. And it means to choose. It is come from the same root of the khair, the best. And he asked me the same question: what is the meaning of khair ummah, the best nation? And I explained the same thing, and we laughed. Because the way I explained to him is similar to the way he explained to me. So we laughed, and he said to me, this is the best day, Imam. I said, why? He said, because this is the day when the best and the chosen meet. So we began to think about how to minimize our misconception, because we Muslims have a lot of misconception about the Jewish people. We have to be honest about this. Some are true, but mostly not true. So what are you going to do? And we agreed to organize the first summit of imams and rabbis in the United States. 25 imams and 25 rabbis get together in New York City.
What year?
2006. And in the session in the morning, almost no one talked other than about Palestine and Israel. Looks like our connection only Palestine and Israel. So finally, we moved to our mosque in the afternoon with prayer, Zuhur prayer, and continue the discussion. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the morning, but I just wanted to go to the point that this man developed, evolved. From someone who hated Islam, who hated the Muslim, to become not only friend, but defender of Islam. Defender of even Sharia. Sharia, he defended Sharia. In time that politicians in America campaigned against Sharia, he defended it. And he came to me, as I mentioned in the morning, he said, Imam, what is Sharia? Why Americans are so scared of Sharia? And I asked him, as I said in the morning, when you eat, Rabbi, do you eat kosher or any other food? Just any food? He said, it must be kosher. Do you eat kosher? For what reason? Is it a health reason or religious reason? Say religious reason. So it means the law, right? Religious law. Say yes, because of religious reason. That's what Sharia in ours. I eat only halal. Secondly, Rabbi, are you circumcised or not? I really asked this question. And he said, yes. I say, I know that. Jewish people are circumcised. You don't have to show me. But let me ask you, are you circumcised for health reason or for religious law? Say religious law. Similarly, I am circumcised too, for religious law. That's what Sharia. It means that to be Muslims, we have to follow the laws that are regulated by Allah. But our Sharia is not a cutting the hands. Cutting hands happens in the past when the people fail to implement Sharia. What is Sharia? Justice, prosperity, kindness, being compassionate to your neighbors. In the time of Umar, there's a lady stole from her neighbors. And Umar asked, why did you steal from your neighbor? And she said, my husband died in the battle to defend Islam, and I have 9 kids. I want to feed them. I don't have money, I don't have any food. Umar then see the neighbor's rich person. Instead of punishing the woman, he punished that woman, that neighbors. That is Sharia. The Sharia. But you know, and the people understand Sharia is cutting off hands, stoning the adulterers, and all this stuff. Sharia is justice, it's about compassion, it's about helping others, you know, it's about prosperity, it's about building economic empowerment. It's all Sharia basically. When you smile to your neighbors, for me it's not a social issue. It's not only to be considered a good American to be smiling around, or good Indonesian to be smiling around, or good Sri Lankan to be smiling around. It is about Muslim, that Prophet Muhammad said, "Tabassumuka fi wajhi akhika sadaqah." Smiling to your brother is a part of charity. So I smile, it's part of my Sharia. I help my neighbors, part of my Sharia. I pray 5 times Sharia, I fast Ramadan Sharia. The amazing
thing in Indonesia is that there are some Muslims who say, I'm a Muslim, but I don't believe in Sharia. How are you going to be Muslim without believing in Sharia? You don't pray 5 times daily, there's Sharia for you. So Sharia is our life, and that is positive. So my point here basically is continue engagement. Sometimes you don't have to preach. You don't have to talk. Just show them that we are friendly, open, inclusive, want to be helping, and so on and so forth. They're going to change, inshallah. Wallahu a'lam bissawab. The time is up. I think it's enough for today. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jazakallah Shamsi for very thoughtful and I think very important reminders for us. I also thank the audience for the important questions and basically just for being here with us in our gathering. Just some few points that I took note. Like Imam Shamsi Ali started with the idea of how history is very important in Islam, like as a field of science. It's sirah and hadith and all that. But learning that history is important in Islam is not enough because we turn out to like to romanticize our history and Imam Shamsi gave us some possible causes of that, and he also gave us some like so he gave us some way outs, suggestions of way outs in terms of how we can benefit better from our history and how we can, basically better ummah in our context. That's all from me. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wal 'asri innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus solihati wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr. There will be closing session in Grand Ballroom, I think 10 minutes from now, so if you want to.
It's not guided in the right way. Yeah, so there's a lot of like this popularity just like trying to get the thing between Muslim and Christianity and trying to put the two and two together and
Jason.
especially in the sphere of TikTok, they're trying to like put Islam in 2-second video, 4-second video, something like that. So there's a lot of that going on.
Oh wait, I have a model in my pocket.
Oh, LA, yeah, because like LA is very beautiful. So, like, I agree with some of the stuff that you said. But like the way he delivered it can be a little bit too harsh sometimes. But yeah, a lot of what's your name? Chad. From where?
Yeah. This can be held in Orange County. So,
I say I'm from LA, but I'm like 1 hour away from LA. So UCLA. Yeah. Oh, 1 hour away.
Hey, by the way, USC is like proper. It's in downtown. It's actually downtown. I'm from that area.
Where US is.
Like where it's nearby there.
My best friend went there, but he always came back to Indonesia. Okay. Thank you.
Why is it still here? Is the question. Or is it supposed to be here? Is the question. It's still recording. For 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Is it still recording?
Yes.
Oh. Could you help me take these tables up to stage?
Yeah.
Maybe we should at least get one of them off the stage. Okay. The stairs are open. Okay.
I'll do that.
Are you sure? Okay. Please be careful.
ininya dia masuk sini. Loh, belum dimatiin. Enggak,